Hi, I'm Louise Lalaurie. I'm a translator from French, and I've just come back from voting for the very first time in round one of the French presidential election here in France. Today, therefore, seemed like a very good time to read an extract from Human Nature by Serge Joncour, his new novel, which will be out from Gallic Books in September in my translation. The year is 1981, and a group of students are about to set out from their shared flat to attend a presidential election rally. Friday, April 24, 1981. Tonight, Toulouse was hosting the last big campaign meeting for the presidential candidate François Mitterrand before the first round of voting. The apartment was the designated meeting point for them all, before heading off to the stadium together. While they waited for the others, they mimicked the lyrical eloquence of the man with the rose. Soon they would hear him for real, but for now, everyone had fun taking turns and proclaiming their socialist ardour, Mitterrand style. Antoine and Marc were the party poopers, gleefully reporting what their families had to say on the matter. My grandfather reckons the foul weather and wintry cold this spring signals the advent of communism at the heart of government and the coming of the great east wind. Yeah, mine is saying that if Mitterrand is elected, France will join the USSR and Russian tanks will roll down the Champs-Élysées on the 14th of July. Caroline was annoyed. Well, of course, that's what all the bourgeoisie think. They're afraid of socialism because socialism means real brotherhood. To which Sophie added, "Socialism is the seedbed of the people. Death to the bourgeoisie." Well, for me, socialism will come when everyone buys their share of toilet paper, kitchen sponges and washing powder, declared Paula solemnly. Sophie and Paula were not about to waste this opportunity to settle their scores with those of the household who only ever helped themselves and never thought to buy food, apart from beer and crisps. The boys, basically. Caroline applauded loudly, then addressed them in the solemn tones of the leader she undoubtedly was in all their eyes. Socialism means remembering to cast your vote in the first round on Sunday. So anyone who hasn't registered at this address needs to get on a train and get down to their home polling station with Pa and Ma. There's only one way to win an election: vote. Any way you can, but vote. A good 10 or so of the assembled company broke into applause, glasses in hand, at her rousing exhortation, while the rest remembered they hadn't registered for or received their voting card, and now it was too late. Mitterrand had disappeared from sight over the winter, but now he was holding meeting after meeting in the main provincial cities. He recognised the rural roots of families that had moved to the towns, their deep-seated nostalgia for their home region, their sense of themselves as children of the soil. On his latest poster, he posed against a backdrop of a village in the depths of the Morvan Hills, a photograph that proclaimed France was still a rural nation with cherished, long-held traditions. Countering the country postcard, Giscard was a figure of cold protocol, backed by the gilded panelling of the Élysée Palace, a disdainful, elitist monarch at the heart of Paris, the overweening capital, the centre of power. Rustic roots apart, Mitterrand was there tonight because of all the great regional metropolitan centres. Toulouse was the only one to have said non to de Gaulle in 1969. All the city's parliamentarians, the president of the regional assembly, and most of the surrounding municipal mayors were of the left. Symbolically, the city known to all as the Ville Rose was the last staging post in Mitterrand's conquest of France. But for that, the stadium must be full. On this cold, wet night, nothing was less certain, and if the stands were empty, the 3 TV channels that had risen from the ashes of the old public service broadcaster, ORTF, would be only too happy to film the dismal scene. Sure enough, the ghastly weather discouraged some of the party the minute they set foot outside. Rather than freeze in a stadium, they preferred to play cards back at the apartment. Finally, 11 of them set out for the rally, a proper football team. But there were only 3 mobilettes. Marc and Paula climbed aboard Antoine's Piaggio. Sophie and Brigitte rode pillion behind Pablo on his MBK. They would get there, except that Caroline refused to sit astride the big saddlebags on Shabby's Honda 125. She didn't have a crash helmet for one thing, but she also had no confidence in Shabby whatsoever. He liked to look mean and moody in a huge cape like the Elephant Man, but worst of all, in her eyes, he was one of Anton's crowd. She couldn't understand why Shabby was coming with them at all. He was the one who claimed he had links to Iparatarak, the Basque paramilitary group, the one who bragged about handling explosives. He had no place attending a democratic electoral rally. For God's sake, Caroline, don't be so stuck up. It's just for 5 minutes. No, we have to round the others up first, from Tortoni's. Caroline planned to take a detour via the big cafe on the corner of Toulouse's main square, then head off to the stadium. She wanted to round up the rugby guys. At least they weren't afraid of the cold. She dreaded the stadium would be empty. So she unlocked the communal bike from its place at the bottom of the stairs and led the charge in the direction of Place du Capitole. The wind buffeted them as they rode up and over the Pont Neuf from Saint-Cyprien, like Napoleon crossing the fucking Berezina, said the boys. Tortoni's was even more packed than usual, punks rubbing shoulders with rugby players and the rest. Caroline even recognised a few guys from the far-right Parti des Forces Nouvelles, an ecumenical crowd assembled to celebrate the owner's grand new plan. He was just back from Frankfurt, he told them, where he'd signed with the European subsidiary of McDonald's. Thanks to him, Toulouse would enter the modern age with the first ever McDo in southern France. You're selling out to the Yanks. And so, have you seen the state of this square, the state of Toulouse? Somebody's got to do something or the entire city will fall into ruins. I've secured all my loans. Mitterrand can take the Élysée. Hell, Brezhnev can take the Élysée for all I care. The contracts are all signed. Work starts Monday. But before we connect the pumps to the vats of coke, we've got to drink the booze dry. It's all on me. The owner's open invitation drew a wave of cheers. He was forging a coalition all his own, rallying his clientele to a concrete vision of globalization. Rum from the Caribbean, bison grass vodka from Siberia. He was giving away the whole world. He didn't care 2 hoots about the future of socialism. He'd lived for 5 years in the States. He knew that entrepreneurship was the only way to change the world. Caroline was in shock, especially when she spotted Anton's gang in the crowd. The sworn enemies of imperialism were ready to drink the bar dry to make way for a McDonald's. Guinness for world peace! Jet 27 for peace! The girls left Tortoni's, sickened at the spectacle of such idiocy. But now they had a mobilette each. Caroline kept the bike. Antoine, Eric, and 2 others felt guilty now and left the bar to join them, swearing they'd be back after the meeting to drain Tortoni's tanks. They wanted to ride up front, but the girls made them sit on the back, given the state they were in. At the stadium, not only were the stands full, but a mood of feverish excitement contrasted with the freezing sky. A giant screen showed wide-angle views of the seating area at the foot of the podium. They vaguely recognised the front rank. Lang, Quilez, Mauroy, almost all of them men, a brotherly band of comrades, clearly united by one thing. They were all frozen half to death, wrapped in thick coats, hats, scarves, projecting an image that was far from dynamic and all-conquering. Caroline had never set foot inside a stadium before. It was packed to the very top of the stands, 35,000 people in fine voice hollering Mitterrand, Mitterrand. On the grass, the words Mitterrand Président were spelled out in huge white letters, but the most extraordinary thing for her was the sight, in close-up on the giant screen, and as a tiny figure far below, of Mitterrand himself stepping up to the podium. Mitterrand in flesh and blood, albeit no bigger than a toy soldier. On the screen he walked slowly, holding a rose. A man with a flower in his hand didn't look very up to the minute, especially with that stiff, rather affected walk, as if pacing behind a coffin, preparing to lay his rose on someone's tomb. But whose? Still, a shiver of excitement ran around the stadium the instant he began to speak. A simple greeting addressed to the crowd in general and to every single person in it. Bonsoir, people of the left. Peuple de gauche. 3 words that united his troops and melted their hearts. Unlike those seated down below in front of the podium, Mitterrand was on fire. He wore only a jacket. A leader doesn't feel the cold. He laid the rose on the lectern and spoke not to the crowd, but to each and every pair of eyes trained on him from around the stadium. He modulated his voice, projecting forcefully when required, but sometimes speaking softly, resting his elbows on the lectern as if he was about to confide a secret. Caroline had never seen anything like it. This man shone with a kind of secular faith. Or he was a great actor, a method performer, speaking from the heart, taking risks, even improvising. Yes, in his left hand he held sheets of paper rolled into a tight tube, his speech, no doubt. And while his right hand gesticulated constantly, flickering like a flaming torch held level with his face. The flimsy lectern trembled with every move, even the podium looked shaky, but the candidate looked strong, powerful, unstoppable. Caroline saw the man she had come to see. She heard the words she had come to hear. She found herself listening more and more intently, closing her eyes, to the point where Sophie asked her, "Caro, are you all right?" "I say to you all, and I will say it loud and clear to my dying breath, that I am a free man, and there is no one in this world, no force, no power that can influence my own free will, not in the East nor the West, not in Washington nor Bonn, and not any individual or force here at home, not the power of money for which I care nothing, not capital nor multinationals or lobbies of any kind. There is no power on this earth that will ever force me to speak anything other than my own mind." Caroline was trembling. She wanted this moment to last forever. The grandstands reverberated to the tremolo rising from the podium. Their pact was sealed. Their communion was complete. "And so I say to you all, we'll meet again. We shall meet again soon, in France and for France. Soon for the Republic and for victory." The crowd and Caroline and Sophie rose as one, applauding wildly, hugging each other for joy. But the girls sprang apart in surprise when the candidate left the lectern and the loudspeakers blared the Internationale. The recording sounded uncomfortably old and scratchy, redolent of the Red Army choir, though that in no way deterred the crowd from joining in. "Arise, ye wretched of the earth! Arise, ye hungry and enslaved!" The words reminded Sophie of her righteous rage earlier that evening. The fridge back at the apartment would be empty. The boys could never be bothered to do the shopping, and some of them were clamped to the bar at Tortoni's right this minute, getting blind drunk. They left the meeting, and no one could remember where they had parked their mobilettes or the bike. Some said they had to go right, but Antoine, Patrice and Sophie swore it was left. Confusion and hilarity. Here in the poorly lit surrounds of the stadium, they could literally feel the brotherhood of man. Caroline stood apart from the group, watching them, looking back at them, like the memory of an episode in life years after it took place. Already she felt a kind of nostalgia. She could picture herself in 10 years' time, or 20. She would think about the meeting, and this evening, and all the images would come flooding back. The packed stadium, the speech, the fervour, it would all come back to her perfectly intact. The great moments of history are repositories for our private memories. The little gang in front of her was walking past another group, 50 or so militants, gathered outside their chartered bus, waiting for the door to open. The driver was fast asleep in his seat, and in an effort to wake him, the whole crowd was singing Changeons la vie, Herbert Pagani's anthem for the French Socialist Party, written at the end of the 70s. They looked like a proper band of brothers and sisters, grown-ups rehearsing a chorus they'd all learnt by heart, like a battle hymn or the Ave Maria at Sunday Mass, except that this melody was neither grave nor transcendental, but bright and cheery, Bella Ciao crossed with a Russian folk tune. Why believe the promise of tomorrow when we can change our lives right here today? Sophie, Brigitte and Patrice went and stood with the choir, but they couldn't remember the words. Caroline was sure of one thing. Tonight, more than a political rally, she had witnessed the prelude to real change, the toppling of the old order. But this was more than a one-off revolution. It was the coming of a new age. Whether the man with the rose was elected or not, nothing would ever be the same again. With or without Mitterrand to lead the country, one thing was certain: her own life would change over the 7 years of the coming presidential term. She would complete her studies, get her first posting as a teacher in the state system, launch herself into active adult life, find her own apartment, a man, perhaps start a family here in Toulouse or some other city. The next 7 years would redraw her world.